It started with a quiet knock on my apartment door on a Tuesday afternoon. Callum stood there with shadows under his eyes and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't ask for help. He never did. He just said, "Can I come in?" I made him tea and waited. After a few minutes of silence, he said his hours had been cut again, that the lease on his condo was expiring, and he wasn't sure what to do next. I didn't hesitate. "Take the house," I told him. "You need space, and I don't need all that room anymore." He tried to refuse at first, out of politeness or pride, I couldn't tell, but I could see the exhaustion in his shoulders. I reminded him it was the home he grew up in, and that his father would have done the same. "It's not charity," I said. "It's family." The keys were still warm from my palm when he took them. "Just until I get back on my feet," he promised. I nodded, though I'd already quietly decided he could have as long as he needed. I moved into a smaller one-bedroom near the hospital where I used to work. It was convenient and cozy, and I convinced myself it felt right. After all, I wanted him to build something of his own, and the house, our house, seemed like the best place to begin. A few months later, he called to say he'd met someone. "Savannah, she's grounded, ambitious." "You'll like her, Mom," he said. I smiled through the phone, holding back the flicker of concern in my chest. It wasn't that I didn't want him to move on. It was just that it all sounded so fast. Still, when he invited me to meet her, I said yes without hesitation. The first time I met Savannah, she arrived 5 minutes late with perfect makeup and a scarf that didn't quite match the season. She extended her hand and smiled tightly, the kind of smile that looks rehearsed in a mirror. "Mrs. Hartley," she said, her voice light and clipped. "You look exactly how I imagined." I wasn't sure what that meant, so I just returned her handshake and offered to take her coat. Dinner that night was polite. She complimented my cooking, asked about my job before I retired, and nodded thoughtfully when I spoke. But there was something else, a subtle air of appraisal in the way she looked at me, like she was measuring something invisible. Callum, meanwhile, looked content, happier than I'd seen him in months. And that was enough to make me try harder. Within weeks, they were inseparable. When Callum told me they were moving forward quickly, I raised an eyebrow. "It's just been a few months," I said carefully. He brushed it off. "Savannah says, when you know, you know." They married quietly at the courthouse that spring. I gave them my blessing in a check tucked into a card. Savannah accepted it with a gracious thank you and no further mention. I didn't expect one. I only wanted them to start their life without burden. The next Sunday, I drove to the house as usual, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in a towel. Callum had texted that Savannah wanted to host. I rang the bell and waited. When the door opened, the smell of lavender and citrus drifted out. My mother's worn rug had been replaced with something sleek and modern. The wooden coat rack was gone, and in its place stood a white lacquered console table with a ceramic bowl full of decorative pebbles. "We've been redecorating," Savannah said when she saw me staring. It needed a refresh. I nodded, though I felt a flicker of unease. The living room was barely recognizable. Neutral tones, sterile lighting, none of the warmth I remembered. The family photos had vanished. The old quilt I'd stitched by hand was nowhere in sight. "We're trying to make it ours," she said casually, handing me a glass of wine. I took it and smiled, but something in me shifted. I was still trying to convince myself that change was natural, that this was still the house I had known. But that feeling weakened a little more every time I stepped inside. Later that evening, as I pulled out of the driveway, I noticed the porch light had been replaced with a sleek motion sensor. And for the first time, I wondered if the house even remembered me. I told myself not to take it personally. It was their home now. Or so I kept repeating, though the words never quite settled comfortably. I tried to let the redecorating go. The furniture, the photos, even the smell of cinnamon and old books that used to linger in the curtains. They were gone, replaced with cold eucalyptus diffusers and silent corners. But it was what came after that slowly began to erode something deeper. Savannah started making comments during my visits. "You should really text before stopping by," she said one Sunday, even though I had twice. "We're trying to establish routines." I nodded and handed over the blueberry pie I'd baked that morning, pretending not to notice the way she placed it on the counter without acknowledgement. One afternoon, I came by to drop off a few winter coats I'd found in storage. My key still worked, but as I stepped into the foyer, Savannah appeared from the kitchen with a startled look. Eloise, she said, sharp but composed, you really should wait until someone's home. I apologized and explained. But the tension lingered. Later that week, Callum called me to say Savannah thought it would be best if I gave them a heads up from now on. Just for privacy, he added softly. I heard the apology in his voice, but not the courage to stand behind it. It wasn't long before she started referring to it in front of me as our house. Not the house. Not your place. We're thinking of painting the kitchen next, she said casually over dinner one night. It's our home now, and we want to make it feel like us. I looked across the table at Callum, but he kept his eyes on his plate. Worse than the changes to the house were the subtle shifts in our family rituals. Sunday dinners became less frequent, then disappeared altogether. My casserole dishes stopped being returned. Savannah claimed she thought they were theirs. The quilt I asked about was probably in a box somewhere. I stopped asking after a while. Every inquiry seemed to deepen the distance between us, until even the questions felt like trespassing. But the moment that finally made something inside me twist came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when I stopped by after Callum had forgotten his jacket at my place. Savannah opened the door just wide enough to peer out and said, "We're not taking visitors today." That was the day I realized I needed to find out what else had quietly been taken. It was a Saturday morning when I first saw it. I'd been scrolling absently on my tablet, half listening to the rain against my apartment window, when a familiar image stopped me cold. A listing on a local marketplace, my mother's Tiffany-style lamp, the soft green glass, the bronze base with a tiny crack near the cord, unmistakable, listed for $850. Authentic vintage, excellent condition, it said. No mention of where it had come from. I stared at it for a long time before I clicked on the seller's profile. There were more. Dad's leather-bound editions of Faulkner and Steinbeck. Mom's hand-painted tea set from Prague. A half-dozen small oil paintings I hadn't seen in months, all described in perfect detached language. All familiar, all for sale. I drove to the house without texting. Savannah opened the door. Her eyes widened for a second before she smiled. "Eloise, this is unexpected." "I need to speak to Callum," I said. She didn't move. "He's out back working on the fence. Can I help you with something?" I stepped past her before she could stop me. The hallway was quieter than I remembered, as if it too were holding its breath. I found Callum near the shed, holding a hammer in one hand and a tape measure in the other. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up, startled. "Now?" "Yes, now." We sat at the edge of the porch steps. I showed him my tablet and the listings. He didn't speak right away. "I didn't know she was selling those," he said finally, his voice low. "I thought she boxed them up." "She's selling our family," I said. He rubbed his face with both hands. "She assumed the house was mine, that I inherited it." I never corrected her. The words landed like a weight between us. "Why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I was broke, jobless, and she liked thinking I had something solid. I didn't want to scare her away. So you let her believe it was her home to take apart piece by piece? I thought I could fix it later. Later never came." Callum looked like a boy again in that moment. Small, unsure, shrinking beneath guilt he didn't know how to carry. I stood, not because I was angry, but because I needed to breathe. "I want the keys back," I said. "Not now, not today, but soon." He didn't argue, just nodded. When I turned to go, Savannah was watching from the window, her face unreadable. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge her. That night, I opened the old filing cabinet in my apartment and pulled out the deed. The paper was worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but the name printed on it was still clear. It was mine, and I knew I would need it soon. I baked the apple pie early that morning, the way I always had. Granny Smith's, a touch of lemon, cinnamon just under the crust. It was the kind my husband used to love, the kind Callum once begged for every birthday until he was 15 and thought cake was more grown up. I wrapped it in a clean dish towel and carried it to the car as if nothing had changed. As if this were any other Sunday. When I rang the bell, I could hear music inside, soft jazz layered over the murmur of voices. After a long pause, the door opened just enough for Savannah to look out. She didn't smile. "Now's not a good time." "I just brought pie," I said, keeping my voice level. "5 minutes, that's all." She sighed, too loud, too theatrical. Wait here. The door closed. I waited. When it opened again, Callum stood there, arms crossed over his chest like a shield. Hey, Mom, it's kind of not a great time. It's Sunday. He looked back over his shoulder. We have people coming over, friends. I lifted the pie gently. Just wanted to keep the tradition. Before he could respond, Savannah appeared again, pushing past him. This is exactly what I meant, Callum. The boundary issues. You don't just show up. I texted yesterday. I said, still calm? And we didn't answer. That's the answer. She folded her arms. You're a pathetic 60-year-old leech, she snapped. Get out and stay out of our house. Something inside me went still. Not angry, not hurt, just still. I smiled. Go ahead, call the police. She blinked. Excuse me? You're asking me to leave my own property. Let's let someone else sort it out. Savannah looked at Callum. She's bluffing. I pulled the deed from my bag. I'm not. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. Officer Jenkins listened to both sides while his younger partner flipped through the paperwork I laid out on the kitchen table. Deed, will, tax records, all in my name. These are in order, the young officer said finally. Ms. Hartley is the legal owner of the property. Savannah paid, but Ryan told me. She stopped herself. Callum looked away. You don't live here with the owner's consent, Officer Jenkins added. You'll need to leave, or we can help you do so. The silence stretched. Then Savannah turned on her heel and stormed upstairs. I heard drawers slamming. Callum followed, calling her name, but she didn't answer. I sat at the dining room table, my mother's table. The pie sat unopened in front of me, still warm. When Callum came back down, his face was pale, his jaw tight. She's packing, he said quietly. She says she's going to her sister's. I nodded. Good. He didn't speak again, just sat across from me staring at the floor. We stayed like that for a long time, until the sound of the front door slamming shook the quiet loose. That night after Savannah left, the house was silent in a way I hadn't heard in years. Not peaceful, just hollow. Callum stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on nothing. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands still folded in my lap. She says I humiliated her, he said quietly. I didn't respond. I kept thinking if I just held it together long enough, I could earn it. The house, the image, the kind of life that made me look like I had it figured out. I turned to him. You didn't need to earn anything, Callum. Not from me? He looked at me then and the mask cracked. I was so tired of feeling like I was behind. Everyone else had something to show for their life. And when Savannah came along, she believed I was someone who had it all together. I just wanted that to be true. And so you lied. I didn't mean for it to snowball. At first it was harmless. Then she started talking about renovations, and people were congratulating me. He stopped pressing a hand to his forehead. I was already drowning. It felt easier to play along than admit the truth. I nodded slowly until the truth came to the door with a pie in her hands. He gave a small broken laugh. I stood. You need to decide if you're building your life on pretending or on something real. Callum didn't say anything else. He just nodded again, and I left him alone in the kitchen. Upstairs, I walked room to room. So much had been stripped away. The lamp, the books, the little oil paintings from my mother's hallway, all gone. But the bones of the house were still ours. The arch in the doorway where we used to hang birthday streamers. The scratch in the banister from Callum's skateboard. The creak in the floorboard outside the bedroom where I'd once tiptoed past so as not to wake a sick child. I curled up in the guest bed, still fully dressed. The house felt like it was exhaling after a long time holding its breath. In the morning, he was still there, and he had something to say. He was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him, and a notepad filled with scribbled lines. I made a list, he said without looking up, of the things I gave up without realizing it. I sat across from him waiting. My friends, my studio work, dinner with you, even jogging. She didn't forbid anything. She just made me feel like those things were childish, selfish, not what a man focused on his future would do. He turned the notepad so I could see. Page after page, all in his tight, slanted handwriting. Each line hurt to read. She checked my location. Not in a sweet way, in a why were you 5 blocks from work kind of way. Once I met Matt for coffee and didn't tell her because I knew she'd react. She showed up 10 minutes later and made a scene. I lost a project because of it. I pressed my hand gently over his. He flinched, then relaxed. It wasn't always like that. At first, she made me feel seen, like I wasn't some failure living off my mother's kindness. "You weren't," I said. "I know that now," he whispered, "but I didn't then. I was just trying to stay afloat." We sat in silence for a while. Then I said, "You can stay here as long as you need, but if you do, you rebuild from the ground up. No more lies, no hiding, no pretending." He nodded slowly. "That's what I want. I want to be real again." That afternoon, he dug through the attic and pulled out boxes marked with my handwriting. Old photo albums, Dad's books, a few dishes I thought were gone. Some things, it turned out, he had hidden before she could sell them. We unpacked the memories side by side, both of us careful not to rush. Not everything could be recovered, but enough remained to remind us of what we once shared. Later, over dinner, he looked up and said, "I need to talk to someone. A therapist, maybe?" I smiled. That would be a good start. And the next morning he made the call. Callum started therapy that week. He didn't say much about the sessions at first, just that they were harder than he expected and quieter than he thought they'd be. But something in his posture began to shift. He walked with more weight in his steps, like he'd finally remembered where the ground was. He reconnected with Matt, then Eliza, then 2 more colleagues from the studio. They met for coffee, then lunch. One afternoon, he came home with a stack of mock-ups for a freelance project and a flicker of excitement in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Then Savannah started calling again. First, it was tearful voicemails, soft, breathless messages about forgiveness, about how hard life had been before him, how she never meant to hurt anyone. When that didn't work, the tone turned colder. "You owe me," she said in one. "I sacrificed everything for you." A week later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was a document filled with legalese and bolded sections that made claims about marital rights, shared property, and emotional distress. The font was too large, the formatting sloppy. I flipped through it twice before handing it to our attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Catherine, who had helped me draft the trust for the house after Michael died. "This isn't legal," she said, setting the papers down with a sigh. "She typed this up herself. None of it holds." Together we prepared a formal eviction notice. Callum insisted on delivering it in person. I offered to go with him, but he said no. He needed to do this himself. He came back 2 hours later, quiet but steady. "She yelled," he said simply. "Then she cried. Then she tried to get me to stay." "And you didn't?" I asked. He shook his head. "I walked away." That evening, we packed the last of her belongings into 2 boxes and left them by the door. He didn't need to see her again. 3 days passed without incident. And then, on the 4th, we came home to find the back window shattered. The officers found her the next morning. Spray paint on her hands, a dented crowbar in her trunk. She'd slashed the mattress in the master bedroom, shattered framed photos, and scrawled curses on the hallway walls. But it was the discovery of the storage unit that stunned even Callum, shelves lined with our family's belongings. The missing books, the tea set, even the quilt I thought lost forever. There was no courtroom drama. She took a deal, stayed away, and disappeared into silence. Callum filed for divorce without ceremony. He moved back into the guest room and stayed for months while we repaired the house 1 room at a time. Not just the damage Savannah left behind, but the spaces she had hollowed out long before she broke the glass. Together, we built something new. We repainted, rehung photographs, and laughed again over dinners. We created a trust for the house just as Michael and I once planned, making it a space that could never be taken by assumption or by charm. When Callum finally moved into his own apartment, I helped him hang a frame on his wall, our family photo restored. Later that night, I looked at the same photo and whispered, "We're okay."